The Brown Sign Project podcast is proudly supported by Stephen Spencer and Associates. There's reopening, then there's building back better, then there's creating a sustainable future business model. From managing change to customer experience design and brand communication, our innovation toolkit helps visitor attractions and destinations build forward better. You're listening to the Brown Sign Project podcast, bringing people together to share experiences and what they love about working within the tourism industry to inspire and empower the next generation of tourism professionals. Join Carlton and Carly as they dive into the world of visitor journey mapping. They will be bringing together panels of specialists to guide and help us understand visitor journey mapping and its role in delivering memorable visitor experiences.
Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of the Brown Sign Project. I'm with Carly as normal. Hello Carly.
Hello, how are you?
I am good, I'm in nice sunny Dubai at the moment, a bit hot, but it's all good. We are now on episode 5 and we're going to be talking about retail and how that fits into the customer journey. And we've got 2 amazing people to talk about that. So let me quickly introduce you to John. Hello, John.
Hello. Hi, Carl.
Hello. Thanks for joining us. And we have got Jonathan. Hello.
Hello. Nice to meet you.
You
yeah,
too.
I made it really confusing by having a John and a Jonathan today, but we're going to be very specific about John or Jonathan. So
Perfect. So John, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do?
What I do? Well, for the last 7 years, I've been working in my own practice, a consultancy, primarily on business strategy and commercial development in the culture and heritage sectors and some niche areas as well, and charities, with specialisms in retail, hospitality, some venue hire, but also visitor service and customer experience. And sometimes it goes into other areas as well, depending on the needs of the client. Going way back, I sort of got into this having graduated quite a long time ago, and then trying to decide what to do. I got a casual job at Harrods one Christmas, and then decided actually it would be a sensible thing to go onto their graduate training program, which I did, because it was a very good one at that time. And then from Harrods went on to Hamleys, so both premium retail brands. And then I did a circuitous route into the culture and heritage sector, working first of all for a charity called the Charities Advisory Trust, which is not public facing. It actually advises other charities and bodies on income generation and trading specifically. And that's where I was brought in, because they'd just taken on a contract at that time to manage the trading at Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery. This is quite a long time ago. But from there, moved to the Royal Academy, which is actually something that Jonathan and I have in common. I was at the Royal Academy for several years, rising to the position of head of commercial, with responsibility across retail, catering, fine art framing business, licensing, e-commerce, all those sort of things, everything actually except publishing. And then moved to the Science Museum Group, where I was head of commercial across 5 museums that were in the group, including the Science Museum in London, Railway Museum in York, and the Media Museum in Bradford. That's 3. Shildon Railway Museum, called Locomotion, and the Museum Science Industry in Manchester, which came into the group while I was there, which was really interesting on integrating commercial, including commercial systems, integrating a museum into that. And then left there to set up on my own to do what I'm doing now.
we have to have a discussion one day, John, on one of our other episodes about kind of career progression, because I think you've worked in some super interesting locations along the way. It's always interesting as well, like I say, when your career sort of coincides with other people. So that brings us on to Jonathan, obviously, who has a RA background. But I think it's always nice when you always meet people along the way in your career path of, you think, oh yeah, we both worked there, and it might have been at different times, but you always have that in common.
Particularly in this sector, I think.
Oh yeah, it's a very small world. It's a very small world. Yeah. Lovely. So Jonathan, tell us about you.
Hello. So I'm currently commercial director at the Courtauld. Obviously, we're about to reopen in November. And like John said, previous to that, I was head of commercial at the Royal Academy. And then previous to that, I was head of commercial at the Shard as well. And I guess that's really been my sort of entry into our sector. And before that, my background is really sort of pure retail. So I started very much at uni and then Saturday Boy at John Lewis, and kind of worked my way up to doing all sorts of bits within the partnership. So opening stores to running their sort of warehouses, and then doing construction for them. And then I sort of left there and done flurries in luxury retail, so Selfridges, and then I went to boutique stuff, so Oliver Bonus and sort of Paper Chase. And I guess throughout my sort of career, it's always been trying to go into sort of the attractions and how do you further that sort of retail path into something more creative, more interesting. So obviously coming through to the Shard and developing everything we did there, and then through to the RA, and now at the Courtauld, where we're sort of embarking on really sort of expanding what we're doing in retail, how we make that more immersive, how we bridge the gap between high street and sort of heritage, and making it really different. So yeah, it's a little bit about me.
That's awesome. Thank you very much for that intro. All right. So are there any conflicts between making money and providing great service? Let's start with John.
Well, actually, I'd flip that round and say that you need to provide great service and great experiences in order to make money in any sustainable way. If you don't provide a good service, people are not going to engage with your money-making side. If you think, I mentioned it being in the cultural and heritage sector, if people don't have a good experience, they're not going to engage with the experience, and therefore are going to be less inclined to visit the shop, visit the cafe, and less inclined to visit again, and less inclined to give positive word of mouth. So I think you have to get that great service right in order to make money. So I would flip it round. If people have a good visit, they're more likely to repeat, and they're more likely to recommend it to other people. And you see this in many occasions where the service levels are high. You tend to get a higher conversion rate from visitor to customer in retail, and they spend more. So it's sort of a virtuous circle, really.
Jonathan, do you find that at the Courtauld or your previous attractions as well that play out in real life, do you think?
I think they do, and I concur with everything that John's just said there, but I almost sort of look at it from the retail and commercial side, and because there's always that question of obviously you need to make money. Most of the institutions or attractions need that money to either sort of operate or to further what they might be doing. So they might have a mission or vision, and they have to obviously rely on that cash. But I turn it around almost and say, well, okay, the people that are visiting you, you need to obviously make them buy something, but it's how you go about curating as opposed to just simply plonking product within your sort of retail spaces or just putting food on the table for them to buy. So I think you can commercialize it and you can make money out of it, but I think as long as you're sort of curating the product and it's meant and it's got sort of a reason to be purchased, and you're not just sort of creating what I call kind of sort of tut in someone's home, and I think that's only a good thing. But I also think that it's not just about commercializing it for one instance. I think it's about how do you make that experience really special, but how do you make that experience feel part and parcel of their, it could be a weekly thing, it could be a monthly thing, it could be a couple of times a year. So how do you sort of keep that sort of the long tails of that journey longer than just I'm going to come for one visit and then they'll never come again. And I think that's really important. And then it's sort of then folds into the visitor experience, but also that the visitor experience starts from before they've even physically got to, your site. It starts from the booking process, it starts from the online shop. It all has to happen there first as well, because usually that's where most people would try and find out a little bit first before coming to your door. So I think it's a whole combination of things.
Yeah, and I will say I'm a big fan of random tut in my house from gift shops. You could, for those of you listening, we're all on video at the moment. We won't share those videos for mainly need to put some makeup on first. But normally in my background is my office, and at the moment I'm not in my office, but it is full of tourist attraction tut. And I'm with you. I think there's plenty of tourist attractions that just have gift shops full of mediocre, not really, mission driven, relevant to the museum, relevant to the attraction itself stuff. And I think you're right that what works really well is when that flows through the whole process, and you can see this thing relates to the experience that I'm having, and therefore I want to give money because it reminds me of my experience, or it generates a feeling in me, and that's all driven by your mission of your museum, is that you have to know what that money is going towards and what that money is meant to be doing, and that helps you have a better understanding, and a better relationship, definitely.
I think relevance of product. Thinking about the merchandise side, the relevance of the product to the organisation, because it's the heritage and culture sector in particular are in a really unique position, because as we know, people are looking for experiences, and visiting a site is an experience. So it's the experiential retail that people, heritage sites and museums, it's a given. They've got that uniqueness, they've got that exclusivity, they've got that experience. So the retail should be building on that, and it's part of a narrative, as Jonathan says, from first going onto the website to look at opening times and prices, right through that chain. I think you always say storytelling, or a narrative that runs through, that brings all these things together. Retail is part of it. Quite often it's towards the end of the visit, so all that stuff before has got to have been working well to get that spend in the shop. And obviously you can do a certain amount in the shop with your range selection and, as John said, curated ranges, but also exclusivity, because that's a unique thing, and relevance, which people are looking for. They're looking for a continuation of that experience.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I want to kind of jump on and ask another question on that. So pre-COVID, I want to kind of talk about, especially you guys are based in the UK. Do you think tourist attractions have had a good balance of visitor experience and commercial in their attractions, or is there still a lot of work to go to get that balance?
I think it depends on where you go to. I would say that if it's more attraction or museum led, I think there's less. Well, there's certainly when the sort of institutes and attractions that I've been to, I feel like there's less reliance on putting on good service, because before the pandemic, then there was obviously just sheer number of volume, and it's really sort of it's almost like having to just herd sheep, because there's so many people. You just have to push them through, get them through the experience, and then everything sort of falls down a little bit. But actually, that's good in one sense. But now, obviously, we've had going through the pandemic, and we're sort of reopening. It's more important that you have all your sort of T's crossed, and actually you concentrate on those few people that are coming through now in terms of domestic tourists, to make sure that they are getting the right level of service, that they do feel comfortable, that they know where they know that they're in a safe environment, and that they can sort of take their time to go through and sort of explore the artifacts, look at the art, explore the attraction itself. And I think some of those have been sort of missed, and I think it's really important that that's really prioritized now. Like, they're not just cash cows. you actually have to treat them like like actual proper visitors, and give them what they expect. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I think people will be, because we're not like, if I was going to New York for a week, I would happily just check off the things that I wanted to see, right? And vice versa. If people are coming to London for a week or somewhere else, another big city, Edinburgh or Birmingham, wherever, is that they'll have certain things that they check off, but they won't necessarily be thinking, oh, I that experiential retail stuff probably doesn't factor a lot into that. It's a checklist sort of visit. But actually, when people are staying more local, they're probably more likely to want that kind of thing anyway, because what sets you apart from the other museum? It might be a museum I've been to 20, 30 times before. It might be an attraction that, is in my hometown and I've got a lot of competition for. Actually, those things are going to be the things that make a difference and keep people spending, and not just checking the box. It's that we've been so reliant on international and long distance travel, I think, for a lot of the big nationals, that's really going to change, for probably the next couple of years, really.
I think something that's come out of looking at the COVID safety is organisations have had to really think about their visitor journey. They've had to think about it from a safety point of view, but now we've most attractions and heritage sites, you have to pre-book, but that wasn't the case before. So you've got to make sure your booking system works, and what else can you add on to that experience? So it's rather forced some organisations to rethink that whole process about how people are greeted, because you've got to perhaps do temperature checks, whatever, but it is that greeting has to be thought about. And I know that was that phrase going around about sanitize your building, not your experience. And so that was forcing people to think slightly differently and think more about the customer and how the customer navigates and journeys through the experience.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting, because one of the conversations I had quite early on was about when we were right at the beginning of closures, and I said, actually, I thought some of the smaller museums would fare better because of that, because they've always had to think about that visitor experience, because they haven't got that national pull. So the places that aren't the places that you normally tick off if you're going on holiday actually probably are more used to doing that level of looking at their customer and looking at their customer journey, just because they've never been able to take the visitor numbers for granted. So I think that is interesting. That's sort of how it's panned out. And they've also usually been the better ones at doing really good experiential retail, even if they didn't think about it as experiential retail. But you go to a small local museum, they probably do have local crafts and mission driven gift shops and more interaction, because that's just the way they are set up. So it's a totally different kettle of fish really to what we're seeing now, but they've probably they've always kind of had that. And I think it's the bigger ones that are now catching up, the people that have been a little bit more lax about planning that customer journey and making sure that it's their mission is all the way through that. But I think it's definitely changing. Which brings me actually to my next question, which is, we always talk about exiting through the gift shop, and it's famous phrase. When we talk about exiting through the gift shop, it's always sort of seen as a negative thing, that it's like wringing every last penny out. But we also then talk about when people leave our attractions, it's a really important part of the customer journey, because they're hopefully leaving with really great experiences, really great memories. And do you ever think that those two things are linked, potentially, that there's a link between memories and buying, or that there's a link between that good experience and commercial? That's really sort of the thought that I thought would be interesting to discuss. So Jonathan, you're nodding vigorously at me, so tell me what you think.
So that has been my mission ever since I started in the sector with the Shard, and then obviously through to the RA, and it's been about I almost hate the term gift shop. Like, I don't refer it to as the gift shop, because it's sort of like, it symbolizes when I was a little boy and going to like the science museum, and you'd have those little the little string with a little pouch, and you've got your few coins in there to go and spend some money on, like pocket money bits and pieces, and that's always sort of rings true. But I think for me, it's about going back to the sort of curation, but almost extension of not just if it's the attraction or the museum or the exhibition, it's how you extend that experience. And certainly at the RA, when I was there, we bridged exhibition and shop together. So, when we recreated the new spaces in the RA, we had the main shop, and then we had Gallery 10, which was a blended space. And it's how you bring those different sort of fields together. So, we would create an exhibition shop, which lots of other galleries do, but it's how you extend that. So how does it blend from one zone straight into that sort of pop-up shop or immersive shop, but it still feels one and the same. So it could be more sort of curated special editions, it could be things which you haven't seen within the actual exhibition itself, or sort of one-offs, or collabs, and those are the things which really sort of set yourselves apart, but also allow people to continue that journey. They may have been through an amazing experience, but you don't want it to stop. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is how you then bring that together through merchandise, but also through catering as well. So you shouldn't be afraid to blend those three together. So we created a sort of almost a Picasso pop-up, where we sort of decked it out in sort of a little Parisian style cafe, and they could draw on the sort of table mats and make their own Picasso, and we asked them to Instagram it. But at the same time, we gave them some pencils of the things that we sold as part of that collection. So again, you're introducing elements of curated product, but something fun and an extension for them to do. Then they can have a cake and a coffee as if they were in Paris as well. So it's about that memory, and it's there for a limited period of time, and so they'll always remember. I remember when I was doing this, and this. That was then. So then I think it sort of blends into what you do in the rest of retail. Is how do you again extend? And one of the things that we've been really sort of paramount in doing is not having to have the sort of staple requirements of what everybody would imagine a gift shop to have. So you don't need 10 different badges across your store. You don't need 10 different sharpeners, pencils. It's okay to have one and not have it repeated in another range, but also it's okay just to have, I don't know, 10 of something, and when it runs out, it runs out. I think if you create the product which is it's come from it's beautifully made, it's beautifully sourced, it's packaging sorted, and it looks beautiful, it's almost that sort of buy me now, and if you don't buy it and then you come back in say a week or 2 weeks, it's okay that it might run out and it's not there. And that's the sort of ethos that we're sort of going on, is that I'm happy if people say, oh, that was there last week, do you still have it? And I'm like, sorry, like it was so popular, it's gone, but we do have this other one which is different. So it's how do you extend that sort of, you sort of create that demand and you create that sort of want for that beautiful product, and now they don't have it. They'll remember, actually next time if I see something, I should get it, and take it with me, because the next time I visit, it might not be there, but I'll have something else. And that's really about, we shouldn't be too worried about over mass producing products. It's okay just to have short runs, and also to source locally. If you can find locally made products or local artisans, do that. And that's something that has really sort of, especially whilst at the RA, it's really transformed the way that sort of retail environment and space works. And I think it's how the sector needs to think differently about how we evolve, but also people have more choice. People have less money or a bit more money conscious about how they're spending their money. So they need to think about actually it's an investment and that they're buying into something as opposed to just buying something which they're just throw away.
We had a chat about a couple of months ago, me and Jonathan, and something that you kind of triggered my mind is your retail offering. The cakes and the coffees and stuff was all served in the middle of the actual experience and not at the end. Can you just briefly just tell us why they did that? Why did that attraction to go down that road?
So we did that really to almost put almost not a permanent break or a stop, but it's almost like a thinking point. So it's really just sort of allowing the visitor to sort of think, oh, what is this? And explore, but almost a bit of a pause. So it's a natural sort of pause in terms of dwell time. So sometimes you want to sort of maybe slow down the rate of flow. You want them to sort of explore what they're doing, and we did that on purpose to allow that flow to happen, but to introduce something which they would never think would normally be done, and actually question, actually that's actually really clever, or I didn't think that this would be here. And it's sort of, the funny thing is when you see people congregate and they were sitting and they were sort of having their coffee, and you had all these other people around you who were carrying on doing, having the experience of the exhibition, you almost create that sort of jealousy. So they're enjoying an experience that all the other people around them now can't take part in. And so, and then you sort of build that sort of, oh, I wish I could do that. Is there a space free? And you create that sort of demand. And again, it's how you sort of, if you're in the moment, you can have that. And if you miss out, then you miss out. And I think that's what then triggers you to remember not just the exhibition or the sort of retail experience, but the overall. So it's catering, retail, and the actual exhibition or attraction. And I think that's really important. And those are the lasting memories. So people will either remember that and think, oh, that was amazing, I wish I could have done that, or I need to try and remember to do that again. And it's also being to turn it upside down and say, we're not going to follow the norm, and not be afraid to not follow the norm. I think that's really important as well. Challenge what has been the norm for so long, I think is really good, because it's what keeps you different and differential. And I think that's more important now as we come out of sort of lockdown and we reopen, that people are going to be wanting to look for those spaces which are different and are doing things differently. And I think that can only build your sort of customer base and your repeat customer.
And John, obviously you work with a number of clients looking at, quite diverse retail offerings and commercial offerings. Are you seeing a sort of change from the traditional exit through the gift shop and sort of where that sits in the journey? Because we always think of it as being at the end, but actually I haven't seen that unless it's a really specific space in quite a while, actually.
I think it also, what a challenge that a lot of organisation has are the buildings that they're in. They don't actually offer the facility to exit necessarily via a gift shop. So you may be thinking about how you may have a shop that's, let's say, off the beaten track, but adjacent to. You may actually want to bring that retail offer into another space that people are going through to sort of sow the seeds of, oh, I'd like to see more of that. So just putting a capsule range into a high traffic area as a signpost to more that lays beyond. The project I worked on fairly recently was one where there was a very, very high ceiling in a reception space. It was almost like there should have been a staircase there, but there wasn't. So it was very tall. And actually that became one of the things that were proposed, was for the posters and prints to become like a gallery, but with below the pictures on the wall, there would be the stock, so you could buy them. So it sort of was very relevant. The imagery was very relevant to the subject of the organisation. But you didn't at first, as you feel that you would be in a shop. And this was all a proposal stage. I was working with architects on it. And I thought that was just a really interesting way of using a space that otherwise could be tricky, but creating a mini exhibition where everything was for sale.
Yeah,
So,
you just reminded me, actually, I did some work with a group of museums in Helsinki where they were talking about, they had some really kind of awkward spaces in some of their galleries. And so they decided to just put little pop-up bookshelves in there. And so people could pick up a book as they were sort of walking around in these little sort of cubby holes almost, and then have a flick through it. And then as they came through the shop at the end, you know, they could pay for it, or they could just move it to another bookshelf or whatever. And they put all the books that they were, you know, that were sort of overstocked off in previous exhibitions, were just sort of dotted around and became sort of like little exhibitions in their own right. So I think, yeah, encouraging people to sort of look at maybe spaces that they wouldn't think of as commercial. It, you know, it's not going to harm anything, and in some cases can really, you know, if you get it right, really enhance people's experience, definitely.
And I do think that, you know, I don't like the word memento, but sometimes that's what people are looking for. If they've engaged with whatever they've experienced, the two things that they might want to deepen that engagement and find things that are related to that experience, you know, maybe books or whatever, to take them further into their understanding of the subject, or to take a memento, a memory, whether it's a self-purchase or it's a gift, something that reminds them of that experience of, I was there to see that, or whatever it is. I think,
yeah, and I think that brings
me. I don't like the word though. I haven't thought another one for it.
No, and I prefer Jonathan's word of, you know, general tut, which
yeah,
what I tend to come back with from places that I visited. But yeah, I think you're right though. There's, for a lot of people, I'm a really sort of hands-on person, and that, you know, as much as I love going around a museum and looking at things, or, you know, in an art gallery and looking at things, is I find that quite a frustrating experience because I want something that I can touch and I can hold. And, you know, I love a physical book, or if I can bring home, you know, a small version of a sculpture, or, you know, some postcards of the artwork that I can have in my own space. That for me is that's going to deepen my relationship with that experience that I had, because, you know, in some cases you can't allow people to touch your artwork or touch the parts of your, whatever your content might be. But there's nothing that, you know, stops you sort of a 3D dinosaur jigsaw, you know, that enhances your understanding of the work you've seen, or whatever it might be, you know, if you're at Natural History Museum.
Yeah, and that's particularly going to be adults buying for children, because it is seen as a learning activity.
No, that's just me loving, you know, a dinosaur.
Right, you love dinosaurs. Yeah. You tend to get parents and grandparents will be buying for the children, because it's seen as a learning thing. You know, take an example of the Royal Academy, is something about colour. You know, it's part of a learning activity, learning about colour and use of colour.
Yeah, I think I always thought, you know, one of my favourite places is the Pencil Museum up in the Lake District. And the museum, the museum's great. Like, you know, it's a very small museum, but actually the thing that I love about it is that you sit in their cafe and you can buy colouring books, and you can, you know, they just leave pads of paper around, and you can buy really nice pencils. And, you know, me and my husband a couple of times when we've been in that area, have just gone and sat in their cafe and drawn for an hour. And, you know, it's a totally different experience. And I think when people talk about commercial opportunities, they think very much of what Jonathan said earlier about, you know, having that pocket money and buying a pencil and a rubber, and they don't think about the more experiential stuff. And I think that's where we're getting to with it.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. We're going to go to our next question. I'm really interested to find out your views on this, because I think this question affects every attraction ever. And it's all about external agencies. So the question is, how do you bring external agencies into your brand? So can I start with John on this one, if that's okay?
Yeah, bringing in other agencies or other partners. What I've done in certainly 2 locations were quite large contracts with catering. And from the customer point of view, they shouldn't see the join. It should be one organization, unless you're bringing in, for example, a premium branding and catering. Perhaps you're bringing, you might be working with a partner and bringing in a named chef to create so-and-so's kitchen or whatever it is. That's slightly exception, but otherwise you want it to still be aligned with the brand, with the missions, with the values of the host organization. And I think the way of achieving that, is going to sound really boring, is to have a really good specification, so that the partners you're going to work to are really clear on what your values are, what your mission is, and also about your audience, who's your audience, and information is and visitor insight, so that they've got something to build on. So I think it all really starts even before you've started talking to potential partners. It's being very clear about your organization and about what you're looking for. Otherwise, if you just, there's a number of contract caterers out there. If you just go for that contract caterer's basic model, you sort of bit square pegs in round holes. So really good brief and specification, aligned to the audience. But then you still want that. The reason why you're bringing another partner is to bring in their expertise and points of creativity. So you are still looking for the bits that stand out and are something different. And that happens. I think it was up at Edinburgh Castle, where a well-known contractor had the contract, and they put in not quite a tea room, but they put in really quite contemporary afternoon tea into Edinburgh Castle. I don't know how it's fared now, but it just was a point of difference, and it was done in quite a sort of boutique style. And I think that's what is important with particularly catering when you're bringing somebody in. It does need to have that essence of the organisation, the host organisation about it, and bring in those twists. I think the RA's got a lot of catering, more now than it had when I was there. And I've seen in the press they're about to do something new with a new partner in one of their two of their catering outlets, which is really exciting to see, working with named chefs. I believe there's a tapas bar going in. So I think it can be done, and the first bit sounds a bit boring, getting your ducks in a row, basically.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think when we talked about sort of external agencies, I think everybody's mind goes to the very standard. This is an outsourced cafe, and that is really ubiquitous, isn't it? And but yeah, the idea of like actually finding a partner that can deliver something that you yourself wouldn't be able to deliver, I think is huge. And I think that, again, leading on from more experiential stuff, is actually thinking about what commercial partners you might work with that actually add to your experience and deliver something that you might never have done. And whether that's, let's say, an afternoon tea or maybe an evening event, with a licensed bar and the things that you maybe just normally wouldn't be able to touch. But yeah, there's so much opportunity out there. I think, let's say, if you just need the right brief to say, this is actually who we are, what can we deliver along that?
That was something we did, certainly the Science Museum group. In the London Science Museum, I think we had 5 different catering offers, and they were all targeted different things. From one end there was the tuck shop, then there was the not quite grab and go, but that sort of family environment, and then there was the one that was a table service for families as well. That if you've spent half the morning going around the Science Museum, which is quite a big place, mum and dad want to sit down and have a coffee, or the adults want to sit down and have a coffee and not have to carry trays and all the rest of it. So there are different levels of experience. And one of the things I actually did go in there was a shake bar, which at that time was sort of fairly innovative to put a shake bar into a museum, and that was massively successful and popular. So there's things like that. And also we did another thing at the National Railway Museum. We themed, working with our partner, we themed the catering, and in what's called Station Hall, which is original part of, it was a parcel station actually for York, and the trains would come in, unload. The space was created so that part of the experience, there were actually these 3 massive packing cases built with room sets in them, and they were part of that cafe, that sort of showing that this is how it was before. It was for packing cases, it wasn't for people. But then we put it into sort of a more of a Victorian style, or the essence of a Victorian style catering, where the service areas and that were done in the style of Victorian ticket offices. So it was bringing that theming in. One of the things that was actually just as I was leaving was a fine dining offer in a railway carriage. It sort of makes sense. It's the railway museum.
Yeah, and I think let's say that those types of things, quite a lot of the time, you can only deliver. We know what attractions are like at the moment. Everybody's trying to do everything with fewer staff, lower budgets, less overheads, and actually, those things are the sort of things where if you can find an outside agency to help you with them, that you sort of lower your risk as well. And whether that's on a profit share and you both do well out of it, or it's it allows you to do something a bit more experimental that you just don't have the confidence to deliver yourselves. I think that does make a massive difference. I know, Jonathan, you've been working on some new things at the Courtauld. Do you want to tell us what you can tell us about those? And then maybe we'll have to leave some things out, but I'm sure that they all sound very exciting.
I was going to say that it's quite timely because I'm about to switch on or go live with our catering tender on Monday. So this is all really relevant, but obviously it extends from some of the things that we did at the RA, and we had sort of, I suppose, long established partnerships and partners who are working in terms of catering, and obviously in many ways they were used to working in a particular format and style, and it was about how do we break down those barriers and change things and evolve things, and towards the end of when I was leaving, we were transforming one of the membership rooms, and it was really about how we took control in terms of the voice and tone of the offer, but also in terms of the environment, and we dictated the design, we dictated what the offer should be, but we worked with them, and it worked really well because you needed that sort of tie-in. You didn't want to lose the sense of who they were as a caterer, but it needed to feel part and parcel. And going back to what John said, that to the visitor, they don't know who they are. It all needs to represent the organisation that they're visiting, have little flurries of the third party. And so bringing that sort of full circle to the Courtauld, what we are doing and what I've been quite I've not said, but I've had objection to it, but I've just said, no, this is the way we're doing it, and I stand by this, is that I've already designed the space, I've already commissioned, worked with the architect that I normally work with. That's all done. We've done the branding, and we are selling that to the tenderer as a complete, the reasons why we've designed it is that it does have assimilates with the rest of the Courtauld. It's got ties, it is bold, it's very, very different in terms of its look. But the way I see it is that it's an asset to the supplier that's coming in. It's an additional asset to their estate. So it's a unique asset. So, they might have a uniform sort of own branding and sort of culture, but actually what they're gaining is something more unique and more sellable from my eyes. And I think it's important that institutions, galleries and attractions aren't afraid to almost be conformist. So, you would do the standard sort of tender, you would do the standard spec, and then you would wait for your responses, and you almost are driven by your sort of tenderers, as it were. Whereas what we're doing here is we're saying, this is the environment, this is the space, this is what you have to work with. We have thought about everything from a catering operator point of view. Do you want to be part of that journey? And that's, I think, where you then form those relationships of them understanding what it is that you're looking for in terms of the offer. Again, it's about tone of voice in terms of what the offer should feel like, what it should look like, and it's for them to sort of come up with a representation of how they fulfill that brief and whether or not that sort of works, and that's what we're going through.
That's interesting as well, because you said about having the tender out, and I do a lot of work for ticketing tenders, for ticketing of tourist attractions, and it's the one thing that we talk about a lot, and I think gets missed out, which you've picked up on, which is actually that tone of voice is actually, who are we as an organization? Because not every partner that you want to work with, they might have the greatest catering, they might have the best ticketing software, they might just not get you as an organization, they might just not fit the bill. And I think that's really interesting. I think tone of voice is probably the best way to explain it, is actually, how do we talk when we talk to our customers, and are they going to use that same voice? Are they going to come across in the same way? Because it's quite nice sometimes to have a partner who will do something totally different to you, who will come in and say, oh, actually, you do it this way, we do something totally different to that, and we're going to really, change the audience or whatever it might be, to give a different dimension to an attraction that maybe has a pretty, set audience and needs to grow another avenue. But yeah, I like the idea of, actually, it doesn't matter if we're doing something totally different, we still have to come from the same place, we still have to be talking in the same tone. I think that's really, really important. Yeah, I'm interested to see how that pans out, because to come in and think we're going to do it this way is really interesting.
Yeah, it is really interesting. I'm just like sitting and just listening to all that information, and it's brilliant. One thing I just want to kind of add in onto that, is it worth getting external agencies to be part of the museum or attractions onboarding experience, so they can be part of that? I just want to kind of open that up. Have you seen any examples of museums and attractions doing that, or any clients?
We actually do that. So we did that in part at the Shard and at the RA. But what we're also doing is, I think that, not almost from a contracting point of view also, but I think that it's important that whoever the institution is or the organisation is part of, to a degree, the vetting of the people that are going to work with you from the third party, and not necessarily, being fully fledged in terms of the recruitment, but at least being able to, again, going back to that tone of voice, but also the behaviour. So what is it that we're looking for? How does that relate into the rest of the organisation? But also develop a onboarding for third parties and for people that might come in to work with you. And I don't think that, that just extends to people who might be doing catering, but it could be, we have somebody that sort of does VM for us and works with me in terms of creating some of the sort of experiences that we do, but they need to understand the culture of the organisation. They need to understand how it works, the structure. And so again, we would put them through a sort of almost onboarding, it could just be like a couple of hours, but at least they get a sense of what the organisation is about, what does it stand for. The courtauld isn't just the gallery, it's also part of the university, so it's got the faculty and the academic side, so there's a lot more involved with that, and I think a lot of organisations have that, so it's important to do that. So we do have that as part of our induction.
I think also it does need to be thought of as a partnership. I have seen in the past, there can be a bit of an us and them. That's the museum and that's the caterer, or that's the contractor. I didn't mention in my intro, but I do also have done interim roles, and I was interim commercial director at the Design Museum a few years ago. And one of the things I did was I hosted every Monday morning a meeting with all the heads of all the visitor-facing teams, not just those under commercial. And I also asked that the general manager for catering came along, and he hadn't sort of met anybody else before. And it just needed to be part of it, so that, when we're going around the table towards the end of the session, we'd done previous week and then looking at the following week and what was in the pipeline. There was a lot of information coming out about the catering that people hadn't heard before. So it did make it a more integrated approach. And that was just through sort of dialogue and drawing the contractor, the partners into the teams.
Thank you. I'm really interested to hear more about sort of partnerships, because I think it's definitely a way, let's say everyone's trying to do more with less. And I just think anytime you can sort of spread the risk and spread that load, I think that's going to be a conversation we come back to kind of time and time again, really, as we, this series is one thing, but I think our next series, we'll be still talking about this and, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with partnerships, definitely. Which, I mean, we're going to wrap up soon, so I'm going to come in with our last question, which is a really nice one. I always sort of like ending on this kind of question, which is, what experience have you had that was sort of a commercial base, if you like, of either a commercial thing in a tourist attraction or something we weren't expecting, and what made it so memorable? So you guys made me think of, as an example, we're talking about having the commercial part in the middle of your experience, and you reminded me that I did the War of the Worlds virtual reality experience, which is really cool. My husband's a really big fan of War of the Worlds, and we went and did it, and the virtual reality part was, I mean, it is incredible. The whole experience is incredible. In the middle of that, they have a bar, so you stop, you sort of do the first bit of the experience, and then you stop in a bar, and it's all themed, it feels, and where you are in the story of War of the Worlds, it fits sort of where you are, and it's really cool. And so they kind of sit you in a bar for 20 minutes as your group, and you think, oh, well, we're here now, we'll have a drink. But nowhere in my mind did I think, oh, I'm sort of being forced to buy something here. It definitely felt like part of the experience. And, actually it was really nice, and it broke up lots of other, really virtual stuff that was going on with a really physical, and again, being a really physical, hands-on person, for me, having food and drink that related to our experience, that was in experience, if you like, worked really well. So I'm just thinking about, if you've got some great examples of where you've sort of had a commercial experience and thought, that's it, we've nailed it. So John, I'm looking at you, because you look like you've got a look in your eye that makes me think you've got one.
Well, it's one that is often cited, so it may not come as much of a surprise, but it's the Warner Brothers studio tour, making of Harry Potter, which I've been to a couple of times.
Oh, and anyone who's ever spoken to me on any podcast will know that I'm a huge fan of it. Well, I talk about it constantly.
Yeah, it's right. It is. It's they capture that storytelling from the moment you engage. If you engage online, it happens there. It's not in the most accessible place. You could go to Watford Junction Station, which is a train out of Euston or wherever. And then there's the Harry Potter shuttle bus, branded Harry Potter shuttle bus, to take you to the experience. I actually drove there, and something I wasn't prepared for at all were uniformed staff coming up to greet me at the edge of the car park. Have you got your ticket? Great. Well, if you drive down there, my colleague will point you where to go to the next parking space, and then you'll need to go to that area over there where you check your ticket. You can actually pay a premium. I think they did this brilliantly. You pay a premium to park near the entrance, which is just brilliant. But it was from that moment, when they, I was asked for my ticket, had I got my ticket, etc., in the car park, and I was just ushered from one person to the next, very charmingly showing me, where the next place was to park. And of course, that is then continues through the experience. Without giving it away, there's a bit, you go into an introductory talk, and then there's a moment of sort of surprise and delight. I won't ruin it for anyone who hasn't experienced that.
Yeah, don't. I had initial meetings with them before it opened, and then everyone I've taken since then, I sort of have to sit waiting, like, I'm not going to ruin it. I'm not going to ruin it.
I had to do it the second time I went. I thought, no, just don't say anything. Don't say anything.
It's hard. It's hard.
Yeah. And the clever aspect is the way you navigate through the space, because you feel like it's a free flow, but actually it is directed, but you don't feel it. And we started off talking about exit through the gift shop. Well, by golly, you do exit through the gift shop. But that whole making of Harry Potter is continued through the gift shop, that brilliantly designed, I think, by Callum Lumsden, brilliantly designed, using sets and pieces of sets from the films are used in the retail space. I think it's quite well known within the sector that the conversion rates and transaction values are off the scale at the Harry Potter experience. So it's that whole thing. The first time I went, actually, the bit that wasn't great was the cafe, because it was almost like a Costa. And I think there were sort of issues to do that with licensing and so forth, brand licenses and property licensing, which has now been overcome, and it is very integrated, and they're selling butter beer in the cafe. It all just fits together. And so I'm a great fan of the Harry Potter experience.
Yeah, when they redid the cafe, I think that did make a massive.
It did, because before it was a little bit like, ooh, it's a bit, doesn't fit.
Yeah, it was it felt very high streety, didn't it?
Yeah, but it's very high service levels.
Yeah.
Engagement. There's a fantastic story to tell. They tell it really well, and it's a continuous process from booking online, arriving in the car park. It just follows through.
Yeah, and they've managed to extract a lot of money out of me in my life, so they're obviously doing all right.
They do, everyone who walks through that shop. If you haven't bought a chocolate frog, it's not.
And Jonathan, has anywhere sort of stick in your memory in terms of that?
Well, I think Harry Potter World just does it so well. But I was recently at the Van Gogh Live, and that for me was really, really something different. It's sort of, taking 2D art and transforming that into a sort of virtual visual world where you completely get sort of immersed and lost. And you're given so much time to just sort of wonder and sort of just be within that space and within the art, but you sort of almost forget, you lose sense of time, you lose a sense of where you are, and it's just so immersive that it allows you to sort of even for a brief moment, just sort of escape and imagine yourself in a completely different sort of world, and you just forget about everything. And I think that's really, really important. It's taking time for yourself, taking time just to sort of time out and just sort of really get embedded into that, and then sort of go through the different sort of spaces. And then when you come out and you come into their sort of shop again, it's sort of, it's done in a way that, again, it's not very many items, but it's sort of beautifully created. There are things which are really unique. It's sort of, and also sort of, they're not, what was quite interesting is, and something that we tried to do is, they're not afraid of having sort of things which are at a reasonable price, also things which really are elevated and one-offs. And I think because you've gone through that experience again, you sort of, it's that sort of, it's holding on to those memories again, so you don't mind spending something. And again, when you go through the process of paying, they'll come to you to pay for it, so almost like art gallery style. And I think it's about taking all those barriers and those boundaries away. And the Apple Store does it really, really well in terms of facilitating those payments. And I think for me that sort of that symbolizes how sort of moving more and more to sort of, do you even need a till point?
Oh, now you got me interested. The do you even need a till point is the discussion I have on a regular basis.
That's another podcast, right?
That is, yeah, I mean, genuinely could do a whole podcast about do you need a physical till point. But I'm with you. One of the interesting things you said there, Jonathan, which I think I talk to people about a lot, is we always sort of think about, or we try to accommodate, I think, when we talk about your standard retail offering, we always think, we need to cater for people who haven't got a lot of money. And it's like, you get into your mind that like, we have to have some things that are really super affordable, because if we pick up a 50p spend here and there, then that's really great. But people forget that there are genuinely people at the other end of that scale who maybe they've been waiting for that exhibition their whole lives and will genuinely come and spend thousands because it's something that, they've totally engaged with. If you're a niche museum or you've got a niche exhibition and someone is, genuinely has a real calling for that, you don't always have to worry about the 50p spends and the 25p spends, because you might get one that's, a whole piece of unique artwork that's thousands. for some smaller museums, those types of things can fund them for months. And I think that's really an interesting concept as to how do we make sure we don't alienate everybody, but also, you can sell me anything. I'm terrible. I'm definitely a gift shop aficionado. And I think, if I've had a great experience, you can pretty much sell me anything at the end.
Good to know, Carly. Very good to know.
Yeah, we always say this to my husband, because my husband works in marketing and he's the easiest person to sell to. And I always tell him he's in the wrong profession, but I'm totally in the wrong profession for someone that has to go to attractions a lot, because you can anything in a gift shop. Can't resist it.
Thank you so much for that. This has been such an interesting podcast. I think we could literally have like a whole series on retail and commercial, especially.
Maybe that's next series. Maybe we do gift shop analysis.
Before we go, I would like to invite everyone to kind of share where we can find you online if anybody wants to kind of reach out to you. So, John, where can we find you online?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn, on John Barford. You can find me at my website, which is johnbarford.com, or you can email me at john@johnbarford.com. I think I've said my name 3 times there.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And Jonathan, where can we find you?
Again, you can find me on LinkedIn. I am on Instagram as well. So I'm always sort of taking shots here and there. And also my email is jonathan.ping@courtauld.ac.uk.
Thank you. I'm heading over to your Instagram now. Pictures of tourist attractions on there. I'm in.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today. Really appreciate it. Have a great day, everybody, and thank you so much.